Next on Mars, we have Dean Schuster. Dean is a founder and partner of TrueMatter, a user experience strategy firm. Dean has been advocating for user-centered digital products since the advent of the commercial web. I also know that Dean is avid ultramarathoner, trail race director, reader, and traveler. Dean is also having a workshop later on today, so don't forget to visit that as well. But for now, let's hear what the Soviet space program taught me about digital product development. Dean, Mars is yours.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming on in. There we go. It's all up there. I really appreciate you coming to see this. It's going to be a little weird, a little fun. You can find me, by the way, online. Experience Dean, that's me. That's Twitter. That's Instagram. I am the founder, owner of a company called TrueMatter in the United States on the East Coast in South Carolina. And we do all UX, all user experience. We specialize in complex applications, so we're working with hardcore development all day long. And so it's taught us a lot about how to fuse UX with technology, with development. That's actually a big part of what the workshop is about later. But today, this morning, it's afternoon here today. I don't know what time it is for me. What the Soviet space program taught me about digital product development. We're actually going to talk about this. It's a little bit weird, but hopefully fun. Now, I realize it's strange for someone from the United States to come over to Lithuania and talk about the Soviet space program. But here's the deal. I'm a space nerd. That's just who I am. And I love all of this stuff. I love every bit of what happened during the space race, and there's so much we can learn about it. What happened 50, 60 plus years ago can teach us something today, and that's the great part of it. And so what I want to do is start out by going a little bit back in time to 1968. And the Soviets wanted to put these two little tortoises in space, cute little steppe tortoises. And this was going to be a huge first. They're going to put these tortoises in a vehicle, in a spacecraft, and they're going to fly it completely around the moon and return them safely back to Earth. And these tortoises were going to be the very first Earthlings to circle the moon. Very cool stuff. And here's the spacecraft. It's called the Zond 5. This is the name of the craft that was launched, and everything went according to plan at first. What happened is, they go and they circle the moon and they come back, and it's really wonderful, but there was a problem with landing. They're supposed to land in Kazakhstan, and instead we're going to land in the Indian Ocean. Now, the Americans caught wind of this because they're monitoring things very closely, and they were on a race to go see this craft when it splashed down. They want to get there before the Soviet military. They want to look at this thing. And this was the actual splashdown of the Zond 5. And the Americans did get there first, and they took all sorts of pictures, and they were very excited about that. And then the Soviets pick up the craft and leave. The Americans were looking for intelligence. Remember, this is 1968, and there was a lot of concern about what was happening in the space race. And the Americans looked at the data they got from the splashdown of the Zond 5, and they realized something that they had long suspected but couldn't totally prove. And that is that Soviet technology by that time was far, far, far behind American technology. And that was a huge confirmation, so much so that the Americans knew at that point that the Soviets were no longer a threat to beat them to the moon. So the question that I ask when I hear about all this is, so what happened? What went wrong, is particularly in the Soviets' plan? And because when you think about it, the Soviets were hugely first in nearly everything that happened in the early space race. So what exactly happened here? So I'm going to actually backtrack even a little bit more if you stick with me. And we're going to talk a little bit about the space race itself. Now, most of us here, you're young and you might not, be totally aware of all these things that happen. I had to learn them myself. These were before my time. And it's a fascinating journey. So let's do like a 2-minute download here of the space race. So we got to go all the way back to World War II now. Now, the Soviets, they're coming into Germany, and they're coming in from the east, and they get to Berlin. And the big thing that they do is they're able to capture a ton of rocket technology and a lot of the best minds in rocket science at the time. And they bring them sort of into their sphere of influence. Particularly, they're getting the V2 rocket technology, which was new technology at the time. And of course, everyone knew that these rockets were going to be a big deal, right? They're going to be important for the military in some way, shape, or form. So there's a big interest in these. Now, of course, over time, as we all know, what happens is nuclear technology is developed. The United States dropped the first atomic bomb. The Soviet Union later develops nuclear technology. And all the military minds are thinking, hey, you know what we can do here? We can put a nuclear warhead on top of these rocket missiles. That'd be great. And so they're really focused on making that happen. The Soviets in particular have a big jump start on rockets. And so they develop this huge ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile arsenal. Now the Americans have these as well. And of course, this is the Cold War, right? And the concept emerges of mutual assured destruction, right? If you fire all your missiles at us, we're going to fire all your missiles at you. And, no good. No one wants this. No one wants the other side to start. They don't want to start any kind of conflict. So conflict begins on nearly every other front, political, athletic, propaganda, science, and of course, space. Space ends up being this huge part of the Cold War. If we can't have an out-and-out conflict in terms of military terms because it's too dangerous, we're going to have conflict in every other area. So the space race is part of that. And of course, again, the Soviets have a huge lead in terms of rocket technology because this is, of course, what is going to get humans up into space. So they're doing a whole lot early on with this. And of course, now we have the space race itself. Now, of course, there's lots of things happening in the space race, but of course, there's one place everyone wants to go, and that's the moon. At the time, everyone sees this, especially in the scientific community, as sort of like the pinnacle of human achievement. We've got to get off Earth and get to the moon. Massively big deal. And of course, with space, the big fear at the time was also about militarization. Right? Neither side wanted the other to be the first to have a strong military advantage in space. So this was just a big fear of the time all across the globe. Now, of course, we know the Soviets were first when it came to getting a craft up into space. Of course, this is Sputnik 1. Now, in America, it's 12 years after the end of World War II, and suddenly, in the middle of America, there's a satellite we know. It's flying over the top of our country. Now, as Americans, we freaked out about this. All right, we thought, oh my goodness, the Soviet Union is going to be first to have military weapons in space. They're right above us. What are they seeing? What are they doing? And it really jolted America into action. We did not expect to see this happening so quickly and so soon. And of course, the Americans are trying to play catch up. And meanwhile, the Soviets are first to nearly everything in space. They did everything first. And this is not even a full list of everything that happened first. It's not just the first satellite. It's the first orbit of the Earth. It's the first person to walk in space, the first woman in space, the first fly around the moon, all this stuff. This is all Soviet Union first. So now I ask a further question. So now I really want to know what happened, because the United States somehow caught up. What did they do? Or what did the Soviets do that allowed the United States to catch up? And so I was really curious about this and sort of delved into it a little bit more, because we know what happened in 1969, right? The Americans landed on the moon first. I mean, that's an American flag. That's not a Soviet flag. So why? I mean, why, if the Soviets did literally everything first? Everything. But the Americans get to the moon first. So that's what we want to talk about today. And I want to sort of dive into it from not just the perspective of history, but from our perspective. What could it tell us today? Because these are engineers and developers of the day doing all this work. And the more I thought about what was going on with the Soviet space program, and the more I looked into it, the more I was starting to see these parallels with the stuff we're doing all the time. And it was a little freaky, I admit, because I'm looking at engineers having the same problems we have today and making certain types of decisions about what they'll do and how they'll do it. These are the decisions we make today, and it felt a little, in some cases, uncomfortable. And I want to go through some of those today, because I think this is a cautionary tale for us. It's something that should warn us about developers about what we are doing today and how it can be better or what could go wrong. And there's so many stories from the space race that illustrate this. I'm just going to give you a few. There's really a lot. But let's go in and look at some parallels. The first thing I want to talk about is speed, which of course is very important to all of us for obvious purposes. Now, in the space race, the Soviets were extremely focused on being first. They were first for a reason, because they were focused on being first. They did nearly everything they could possibly do to be first. And I mean, they bulldogged this, they bootstrapped this, they cut corners, they did whatever they could to get their vehicles and get these milestones up in space first. Very important to think about. And one great example is the First Spacewalk, which is an amazing story. This is Alexei Leonov. He's actually outside of a craft. This is the first human to walk in space. This guy is an utterly amazing person and a real hero of the space race. Now, the story of the walk, though, is not something everyone really knows. First of all, the craft is the Voskhod 2, and this craft is going to go up into space for the express purpose of the spacewalk itself. That's the only reason Voskhod 2 was made. And they're trying to hurry, right? They want to get out there as fast as possible. So they retrofit the Voskhod 1, right? This is the craft, Voskhod 2. And in order to retrofit the Voskhod 1, they had to do a few things. They had to remove the ejection seat. They had to remove the capability of an escape at launch or landing. They had to get rid of a bunch of equipment, nail it down just so that they can get out into space. The problem, though, was that they were moving so quickly, they're using older technology, and they couldn't open the craft to space. Right? They can't just open the door and go out, because vacuum tubes were running this. I know, it's crazy. Vacuum tubes are running this capsule. So they have to do something else. So they invent this airlock, and you can see it up on the screen. It's this lower area. I think I would point to it, yeah. They have to invent an airlock, but it's inflatable, an inflatable airlock that they have to install once they're in space. It's never been used before, and it's just an untested idea. And in fact, Leonov himself, he's wearing an experimental suit that he's never worn before. And they're just like, we got to go. We got to get this done. Now, and there's that airlock, as I said. Again, but by the way, Leonov, amazing person. He's also an artist, an amazing artist. And this is a painting of the first spacewalk that he did. Just an amazing guy all the way around. Now, the real price that was paid here was in the walk itself. Now, the launch happens, they get up there, and it comes time for the spacewalk. And Leonov, they install this thing, it all works, and he gets out. There's problems that start right away. Now, I think he was walking for like 12 minutes, but it was all very harried because as soon as he gets out, his spacesuit malfunctions, and he starts expanding out. He's oxygen just making him just huge, and it's a real problem. And then he's like, well, this is terrible. And then he looks at the lock, the airlock he's got to go in. He's like, oh no, I'm too big. I can't get back inside the capsule. So he's a pretty amazing person. So he does the only thing he thinks he can do. People are yelling at his ear the whole time. And he vents oxygen from his spacesuit while he's in space to shrink it down, which, by the way, gives him decompression sickness. And then he goes into the airlock, but he's freaking out at this time because they're running out of time. They have to get out. And so he's being rushed, he's being hurried, and he goes into the airlock the wrong way. Now, that's a major problem because there's no room to do anything in this airlock. So he's got to find a way in seconds to maneuver himself around inside that inflatable airlock, get back inside the capsule, and close it. His heart rate skyrockets, and he's sweating so much that he fills to above his boots with sweat. And somehow, miraculously, he gets back inside. And of course, it's not the end of the story because there was failure in re-entry, and they had an emergency landing in the Ural Mountains, and both he and his co-pilot had to hang out there for 2 days, freezing, waiting for rescue. So they could have died just there anyway. That was such a problem, okay, that future Voskhod missions were scrapped immediately, deemed too dangerous. Now, too dangerous for the Soviets at the time, that is saying something, okay? Because they put up this craft radically untested, and it's essentially a miracle that it happened successfully at all. The fact that Leonov could survive to make this beautiful painting is nothing short of a miracle. Well, I get to thinking about the stuff I do every day and the stuff we do every day. And before you think it's unfair to compare us to a super rushed, untested program that nearly failed and killed people, I would say, let's think about our track record. To be self-critical, I think, digital products today are not exactly known for being error-free, are they? I mean, as an industry, we're not known for just 100% perfect bug-free quality by any stretch of measurement or the imagination. In fact, digital products today ship with really terrible user experience flaws and problems. And you have to take that from a user experience professional. Even the products that are relatively bug-free tend to be extremely hard to use. So we're not killing it on quality. We've have so much focus on speed that we've given it a name. We had to come up with the MBAs had to think, we need a name for this. Of course, it's MVP. Now, I don't mean to criticize MVP. As a principle, it's actually quite good, and it's an adjustment from practices that needed to be remedied. It was very important for us to combat bloated software, schedule problems, horrible scope and schedule creep, never delivering, having problems still. This was a real serious problem. And MVP addresses that in an important way. Yes, let's deliver incrementally. Let's get out something that works and is right, and then evolve it, and then move it. This is all really quite good stuff. The problem is we have sacrificed something in the process. Now, MVP, instead of being something that's theoretically great, something that helps us do our work, what we've ended up doing is kind of leaning back on all the old problems we have. We're just kind of doing them a little faster. I can't think of, on all the products I've worked on in my career, very few, I could probably count them on one hand maybe, are products that rushed out to an MVP release and then actually focused on returning and evolving and doing things sort of right. What usually happens is an MVP is pushed, it's rushed, it's launched, and is not touched much anymore. That's more normal. So we seem to be kind of in the same place we were before. We just kind of got there faster, I guess. And when I think about user experience flaws, certainly MVP hasn't solved any of those, not even close. In fact, in many cases, the drive for speed makes those problems worse. So we've clearly lost something. And we have to think about what our commitment is to truly evolving software. But I see that parallel in what the Soviets did in the space race. It was all speed. And when speed is everything, you will sacrifice something else. You'll squander that promise of a good idea. And so we've got to fix this for, in my view, we have to do two things. We have to focus on the theoretical good promise of MVP and that process being good. I think we have to do. But we actually have to consider carefully how we're approaching quality when we do it. It is possible to create quality software and do it relatively quickly. There's no doubt about this. I see people do it today. And if I go back to the space race, I can totally prove it with that too, because 3 months after Voskhod 2, the Americans launched Gemini 4. Now, Gemini 4 was basically superior technologically in every way to the Voskhod 2. And it only happened 3 months later. So the Americans sacrificed being first, completely sacrificed that by 3 months. It's not a long time. Completely superior, and the experience was totally different. Ed White was the first American in space, and he was out there for 20 minutes. He's taking camera footage. He's loving it. They have to yell at him to come back, not because they're concerned something's going to go wrong, but because he just doesn't want to come back in. In fact, when they force him to come back in, he tells later in his memoirs, as he's closing the door, because of course all he has to do is open the door and go out. As he's closing the door, he said, "This is the saddest moment of my entire life." Going back in to safety. Completely different story in every way, shape, or form. Of course, returned to the Earth with no problem. 3 months later, that's it. So that's quality. A little bit slower. Okay. We have to be the leaders to do this. And I know if you're a development leader, that's something you can do. If you're someone who has to respond to leadership, that's another story entirely. And I can talk about that afterwards. That would be a whole talk, I think. But let's go to another thing that the Soviet program taught me. And that is something I call the Corelove Effect. One person can't save the day. So let me introduce you to this really amazing dude. And this is Sergei Corelove. You may have heard about him if you're a space nerd, right? He was the guy who made everything happen in the Soviet space program. He is revered in terms of his ability to get things done and his ability to hit all those firsts. All those firsts that happened in the Soviet space program, that's all this guy. Now, he was originally thrown in the Gulag by Stalin. in one of the purges. But he was sort of brought out for one very important reason. He knew rockets. He was the dude who knew rockets. And so they're like, we need this guy. And he comes out and he just starts developing the rocket program. And he's the guy who told Khrushchev, he's like, listen, we need to use this stuff to go to space. And not just to militarize space. Forget about that. He's like, the propaganda value alone of going into space is the reason you should do it. And that allowed the Soviets to develop this fast-moving program, which leads to Sputnik 1 in 57. And that's just the amazing sort of not just ability the guy had, but he also was able to persuade really an entire nation. And it proves to me that is very true throughout history, that one person, just one person, can make a total difference, because nothing happened in the Soviet space program without Korolev. He led literally every single last bit of it. He was instrumental in the plans, the strategy, the designs, the technology, the schedules, all of it. If something happened, it was because of Korolev. And that leads to a rather unfortunate problem for the Soviet space program, because in 1966, Korolev just up and suddenly dies. He gets sick and he's dead in like 10 days. And the program utterly relied on him. And there was a serious issue when he was gone, basically a power vacuum. And everyone rushes in to try to be the next Korolev, to try to have control over the whole program. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of problems. And the very first launch, the post-Korolev launch, exhibits this flaw that, if you have one person that's taking care of everything, and that person suddenly is out of the picture, you can have problems. Soyuz 1 was the first craft post-Korolev that goes off. The engineers associated with the project found over 200 serious defects or flaws. And they said, you can't fly this thing. And despite that, it launched anyway. And it became one of the more ignominious firsts of the Soviet Union. It was the first death in flight of a cosmonaut, of anyone in space. And this is Komarov, and there's a commemorative stamp toward him. So things became a disaster very soon after Korolev was out of the picture, unfortunately. Right? Now, this feels familiar to me too, because I've been on teams before where there's this one person, and you're like, man, if this one person leaves, or if they go to another project, we are in trouble. They have domain knowledge, they have programming knowledge, they have code-based knowledge. They're leaders, or they've just got so much talent. And when they move on, projects are, radically disrupted. It feels to me like this happens so much in our industry, especially now, where people are moving around like crazy now, and projects are massively disruptive because we've grown to rely on talent. And you might be those talented people who are, you have, a closed iron fist on a project because you're essential to it. And if you left, what would happen to that project? Ooh, who knows? This happens all the time. Sort of more of a feature than a bug, I think, of what we're doing. So if we're creating systems, and by systems I mean human systems, processes. We've got to create things that don't need us. It's a little scary, but it's the absolute right thing to do. If you're a leader, you have to create systems that outlive you, that outlive talent. Even if you're that talented person, creating this environment at which you are literally able to move on and the project survives makes you, believe it or not, more important than less. And that's something that's really important to us, because sort of this myth of the one person unicorn, one person can save the day. Yes, yeah, they can, but there's a big downside to that. Okay, the other thing that I'm reminded about when I think of the space race is really Pravda. Now, if I give this talk in America, I have to explain this whole thing. No one really knows, especially young people in America. They're like, "What is that?" Right? So I say, "Well, this is Pravda. This is the masthead of a Soviet propaganda magazine. It just means truth." And in this case, of course, we know truth is in the eye of the propagandist. So let's think of Zond 5. Zond 5 happened in 1968. It was, it was okay. It was sending tortoises around the moon. I guess that's great. But by 1968, that's no longer amazing stuff. That's interesting stuff. But the Soviets spoke about Zond 5 as if it were as amazing as going to the moon. And they put out this beautiful, beautiful art. And this is a commemoration of the triumph of Zond 5. Zond 5 was a modest accomplishment at the time. And it was lauded as a huge, big achievement. And look at the date to really bring this home. I mean, something else was happening in 1969 when we're commemorating in the Soviet Union Zond 5, and that's the United States is on the moon. So what we say about a thing is very different often from what the truth actually is. And the Soviets were just amazing at this, quite frankly. The propaganda ability of the Soviet Union when it came to the space race was nothing short of amazing, particularly internally and from the things I love in terms of art and in terms of these are famous sort of propaganda posters from the Soviet Union, and they're wonderful. They're just beautiful in every way, and I love them to pieces. I just love looking at these. I have posters of these up in my office, and they're all lauding the glory of the heroic move into space. First woman cosmonaut. They're lauding the first and the power and the underlying amazing nature of the system that made it happen. This was always what it was. Space means the Soviet Union is superior. And this is what you're seeing in really all of these. This is just a smattering of the beautiful stuff that's out there. Even young people make that model jet, and you could be a cosmonaut someday. Christmas cards, everything. And the goal here of propaganda, as we know today, it's easier in hindsight to see this, is you're driving reality by sheer force of will. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfectly true. You just need to hit hard and drive it in because you're trying to motivate a population. You're trying to motivate a whole people to be super invested in what you're doing and fully committed to it. And that's all that purpose is. So it exists apart from the actual value of the technology or apart from even the value of the accomplishments in many ways. The value of the accomplishments is about what it can offer in terms of propaganda, right? So this was definitely the goal that was out there for everyone. And the Soviet Union is no different from any other country. The Soviets were just really good at it. They're really good at the driving of reality. Now, this one really hurts for me because when I think of digital products, man, countries do propaganda, but the people making digital products, the companies putting work out are pretty dang good at propaganda. I mean, product launches are timed, right, to particular events. They might be particular trade show events or important events, or maybe it's just to placate the investors, or maybe there were particular sales promises associated with when something launches or what something is. That's very similar to what happened in the space program, where many times all those firsts that the Soviets were after, they were really after, they wanted to be first and on an important anniversary, or they wanted to be first and do it on a day that would be embarrassing to the United States. These things drove those dates. Okay, so when you're driving a date based on something arbitrary like that, you're gonna chunk Voskhod 2 up there and do it faster, 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 and nearly kill Leonov in the process. So we're doing this with digital products all the time. We're driving by, we're making massive announcements of wonderful features that are only sort of that much better. Apple's really good at that, right? We're extremely good at being propagandists, and it exists often outside the value of the stuff we're doing, and it really is driving the MVP problem I mentioned before, because we're being driven, and in this room, I think we can say that, we're being so driven by these outside forces, it affects our ability to deliver the right kind of quality. There's no question about this in my mind. Okay, so these are the lessons that I take, and there's so many more, and I really encourage you to research this. In fact, if there's one thing besides that, just in general researching the Soviet space program, look at the first spacewalk in Leonov. You got to read more about that, because I only gave you a little bit of that, and that's phenomenal stuff. But here are the lessons, and they're all lessons of engineering. They're all lessons of our predecessors. These are super smart people who, yes, made mistakes, but yes, did some utterly amazing stuff under those conditions. So the first lesson I take is that there are different philosophies here that we're looking at. Where you start, or how you think about how you start, dictates how you finish. If you want to be first, if your total goal is to be the first person to do something, I assure you, you can do that. If your goal is to not worry about being first so much is about being very good and having higher quality, you can do that first. You're going to pick your poison in that sense. But those philosophies will matter to what you do. Soviet philosophy was clear. We're going to cut corners. We're going to cut every corner we possibly can. And I have barely scratched the surface of the corners cut by the space program in the Soviet Union. They would throw up stuff that was radically untested, completely new, and just to be first. The United States took a little more measured approach. First of all, they knew they weren't going to be able to compete right away. That was clear. The Soviet Union was too far ahead. But it allowed them to make a different choice about how they would continue. Because they said, why don't we just invest in a deeper, more high-quality technology set and not worry about being first? Let's do that. And let's see how that works for us. That was slow to start, but got stronger and stronger and stronger. So by the time we get to the Zond 5 in 1968, really no one's even questioning. We just needed proof from Zond 5 that American technology was more advanced. And so our job is to think about this and to think, what can we take from it? We're facing these pressures every day. Sure, they're not existential pressures of geopolitical importance. We're making digital products, but we feel the same stuff. And we can learn how to see some of these errors and approaches. And I guess I don't mean that to be a downer, or to be depressing, because you're almost always doing better than you think. You feel the pressure of developing under unconscionable timelines. And you're expected to create quality work as well. My guess is that you're probably doing very well at this, but you're probably your own worst critic. But I know you can do these things. And I know because you have a model you can look to. NASA's model was really, really interesting to follow and worth your time to research in terms of how they approached engineering. But do you think you can't do things super fast yet also be careful about quality. Do you think that's true? I would say, I would look to NASA and say that they were working under horrid timelines, just like the Soviets were. And they had the pressure of what the Soviets were doing. And their timelines were worse than yours. And they were trying to do things that were totally new, completely unprecedented. They still had to figure out how to test them, how to keep people safe. They had to have quality in some way, shape, or form. And the stuff they were working on was really, quite frankly, harder than the stuff we're working on. So I do believe we can do it. That doesn't excuse what happens with leaders and organizations who put upon you. But you can do it. And it is about your starting point. It is about where you start, particularly as an organization. And so those are the things that I've learned from the Soviet space program. There's so much more, really. Honestly, I could talk about this all day. But this is me. You can reach me online. If all you want to do is talk about the space program and what it means for us today, man, I'm all in. I would love to do it. I am here to take questions as well. I'm not sure how that will go. It depends on where you want to go with it. But I'm here for a little while longer. Can answer some questions. Would love to.
I see a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the great talk. My question is, as a fan of space exploration, I guess you're following what's currently happening.
Yes.
And what is your take on SpaceX approach to engineering and maybe the other companies that are competing in that space?
Well, I am so excited today about what's happening with space. And thank you for asking that question. I am wonderfully excited about it. We have reached a point where all of this investment that happened by nations and governments that had to establish sort of an entire sector of industry. Now that fundamental foundation is so strong. Now companies have an opportunity to go in and build on top of that. And so you're seeing, SpaceX or whatever, just taking, commercializing space. When I grew up, and this is a little before my time, but when I was really young, the fear that was the Cold War generated about what space meant was very real, and a little unnerving. Today, it's all excitement. Who's gonna? When do we get to the moon to do this next, or who's gonna do what next? William Shatner went up into space a few weeks ago. Captain Kirk went up into space. It was great. So I love the new model. In fact, if I'm being really honest, I know there's criticism of these billionaires who are taking people up into joyrides in space. I would counter and say, yes, absolutely. Keep doing that. Spend your money on this, please. When Amazon did their launch and Bezos was up in space, I said, you know what? I'm going to go buy something from Amazon because I want this guy to have a bunch of money so he goes to Mars. I'm good with that because the benefit to humanity of going to the moon and going to Mars and doing all these things is so high for all of us that I would just say yes, 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 yes. And I do think, there will be problems that will occur, that someone's going to die. That's going to happen. But these goals are really worthwhile. I would add to that, I was talking with someone, this is a year ago or so, I was talking with a NASA engineer. And so I'm 50 years old. And I said to him, all right, look, just be honest with me. Am I going to live to see us land on Mars, to see a human being on Mars? And he steps back and he thinks. I'm like, oh, And he says, officially? I said, sure. He says, officially, I think you'll make it. And I'm very excited. And then he said, unofficially, and I was like, no, don't tell me that, man. So I got to live a long time. So I'm trying to really take care of myself so I can live to see a human get on Mars. To answer your question, I couldn't be more excited. And I hope the competition around these companies trying to get up in space fuels innovation. I know there's good and bad to everything, but I see mostly good in this.
All right, thank you, Dean. Any other questions? I see. Let's give a big round of applause. Dean Schuster, everybody.
Thank you.